Good morning. This is Chris Nelson. I'm happy to be here, or good afternoon, depending on the time zone, of course. I'm going to have a good time right now talking with you, sharing with you some of the ongoing research we have through NITC in the area of fixed guideway systems, bus rapid transit, light rail transit, commuter rail transit, and streetcar transit. We have information, we have some research to share with you on all of these, but we have a lot of ongoing research that we'll share when that comes out over the next few months. This screen shows the overall themes of the presentation. The first one, of course, is to get over and beyond the half-mile circle. We'll be sharing some what I think are pretty surprising market response results to residential and office markets. We'll present information on transit and economic development, and also whether lower wage jobs follow transit investment. That's a really big concern by transit agencies, planners, and so forth. I'll touch on the role of transit and economic resilience. Then I'll have a little fun with a streetcar with desires, the Portland streetcar. We're just starting research on a couple streetcar systems, Portland being maybe the best known of the bunch. Then I'll outline for you the research we have ongoing and we'll be finishing in the next few months and publishing, or in other ways disseminating to everybody. And then I'll want to finish with acknowledging what I call my dream team, the people who have helped make all this possible through NITC the past almost 2 years now. So we in planning have had this mantra, design TODs with a half-mile circle. Where did that come from? Well, actually, nobody knows, as far as I know anyway. It started out actually with the quarter-mile circle. We used to design TODs, and I think many places still do. I think Houston still does design their transit station planning areas based on a quarter-mile walk. And how did the quarter-mile walk come about? I can only surmise that one day, maybe in the 1980s, maybe 1970s, somebody sat down and said, well, if we're going to plan for development around these transit stations, how far away from the stations do we plan for? And somebody else says, well, I guess people walk, and how much distance do they walk? You know, a certain number of minutes. And somebody else might have said, well, I think nobody's going to be willing to walk more than 10 minutes to any place. So how much ground would they cover in 10 minutes? And so somebody looked up the walking distance for over 10 minutes, and the only literature at the time might have been from parks, because it turns out that a 10-minute walk in the park speed gives you a quarter-mile walk. And so we're strapped. I think that's actually how Arlington, Virginia designed its heavy rail stations through the heart of that town. Then there was the half-mile circle based on the 10-minute business walk, but not a whole lot of evidence really supporting that. We are busting that wide open based on our research. I think at the end of our research, we will have the evidence needed to rewrite the TOD planning book. So let's start off with how we can say that through a review of studies we've done, hedonic studies we've done of market responsiveness to transit station location. We've finished a bunch of research on residential outcomes and office. We have some preliminary results for industrial and perplexing results for retail, and I'll explain why in a moment. So for the residential, we have a large database collected based on the Salt Lake County tax assessor, several 100,000 residential cases for a county of 1 million people. But we're using the assessed values because the state of Utah does not report the actual sales price. So we went to the Salt Lake County assessor and we asked the staff how they justify their assessed values and how do they relate to their market prices. And they have other data they get from other commercial providers indicating the sales price of individual homes, and they match those to their modeling for their assessments. And it turns out for apartments, they are basically right on the money. They're almost perfect in terms of matching their apartment values with the apartment sales prices that they get from private purveyors. So we have pretty good confidence that what we're getting from apartment values and also all residential values. Residential is 98%, very close to perfection. So we have pretty good confidence that we can use all the residential information the county assessor has for our hedonic studies. And of course, the standard hedonic model would start off with value per square foot of rental space in the case of apartments. We'd have certain structural characteristics, the building area, number of units, the property tax rate, location characteristics, distance from the downtown, nearest freeway, near school, near shopping opportunity. Neighborhood attributes would be the income, median household income, household size, the race, ethnicity of the block group of where that apartment is located in this apartment example. And actually all the residential examples follow the same hedonic format. And the distance to tracks. Tracks is the light rail system in the Salt Lake area. And so we measure that to the nearest station in 1/4 mile bands out to 1.5 miles in this study. I won't explain this chart because it's too much to go over, but what I wanted to do is say that all of the non-bold numbers are those that are not significant. So very few of these distance value parameters or coefficients are not significant. Almost everything performs very well in a statistically significant manner. This is the chart that I want to focus on. So on the apartment study that we did, it was actually published in Transportation Research Record. We find with the apartments that within the first 1/4 mile, apartment values increased by about $8 per square foot. And then in the next 1/4 mile band, apartment values increased by about $4 per square foot. And that's fairly constant across all the other bands out to 1.25 miles. Beyond which, by the way, beyond 1.25 miles, the coefficients are not significant. So we use the 1.25 mile band as our outer limit. Now, a little on the apartment results, and I'll talk about the other results. If people are willing to pay $4 per square foot, I'm sorry, if the market pays $4 per square foot more for apartments at 1 mile to 1.25 miles, does that mean that the residents of those apartments are going to walk to transit and thereby be willing to pay more for an apartment unit that's 1.25 miles away relative to other opportunities, all things considered? I don't think so. What's happening here is that maybe they take their bicycle to the nearest transit station. Maybe they have a roommate that takes them to the transit station in their car. But more likely, these apartment buildings out here beyond maybe a half mile are on bus lines. And you go to the corner, hop the bus, and within a 10-minute bus ride, you're at the transit station. So the 10-minute time period would be, say, for not just walking, but walking, biking, and taking the bus to transit. And that's why we can push this envelope out so much farther than we have done so in planning so far. For the condo market, it's very interesting. The condos are very sensitive to being very close to the transit station, but beyond about a half mile, there's very little market premium for condos. But on the other hand, condos tend to focus themselves anyway along corridors with transit and not too much in the interior away from transit stations. So this could be more a sampling anomaly than anything else. Townhouses really sticks out. I did a personal site visit of several townhouse developments. They were fairly new, all basically within a 1/4 mile to half mile of transit stations. They're upscale. They know their market. They're all sold. So very clearly, in my view, there's a pretty strong demand for condos within, well within a 1 mile of transit stations. Now, when we get to the detached residential types, the situation is fairly similar with some exceptions. For the larger house type, it's interesting that the dollar value per square foot is roughly the same as for apartments. Actually goes up a little bit more at the extreme. This tells me that larger homes and larger lots have a premium, but I wonder if maybe that's not, if the real reason is that single-family house that's on a large lot might be prime real estate for redevelopment, and the market is capitalizing not just the distance, but the opportunity to redevelop the land on that site. On the next smaller size category, 7,500 to 10,000 square feet, fairly similar results. Now, For the other smaller lot sizes, we have the perplexing situation that the value of the properties closest to the transit stations actually fall below the median, and there's a market dis-premium or dis-amenity effect. And I actually walked around some of these sites around the University of Utah with a couple of transit stations, and these are real dumps. What's happening in the market is the lot size is too small to justify going in and building something much more market sensitive, and the house size is also, and the houses are small accordingly. So what we have to do in these situations is probably combine multiple lots to create a larger buildable size lot to capitalize on the value of proximity. But because of multiple ownerships involved, that could be a problem. So that could be a role for public policy to identify these clusters of very small lots around transit stations and undergo a process to acquire them and make them more market responsive. So we'll move on to office rent premiums with respect to light rail transit station distance. We looked at two areas, Dallas and Denver. They both have extensive systems running throughout the metropolitan areas, and they have more than a decade, actually more like 15 years, bumping 20 in one case, of experience. The landscapes are reasonably uncomplicated. Even Denver itself is many miles away from the Rocky Mountains, and it basically sits on a flat plain. And they have major downtowns, definable, attractive, growing downtowns, and they're both moderately to fast growing. So we looked at how the office market responded to transit station location using CoStar data. Now, CoStar collects information from realtors all around the country. They have millions of properties that are for rent in their database. We had permission to access it in the fall of 2012. The database includes building type, square feet, age of the building, the address, so we can do geocoding, and more importantly, for our purposes, they show the median rent per square foot for those buildings. So we could create a hedonic rent analysis. We have gobs of degrees of freedom. We have 1,400 buildings that we have in our database for Denver and Dallas. And we're excited about this because very few studies anyway go into looking at how office markets respond to transit. I had one some years ago, and a team out of Minneapolis, St. Paul, the University of Minnesota have another one. But there are very few studies of office market responsiveness to transit stations. And I think we're the first one to be able to use rent data. So we have a large database. We can use rent, real-time rent, fall of 2012, and all the hedonic adjustments we can come up with. And we get pretty interesting results. Now, I apologize for the large table here, but we control for things like the kind of building it is, Class A building, Class B. Class C would be the reference. So these buildings are, with respect to Class C, gross building square feet. The higher the building, the larger the building, maybe the more the value is changing, but not much. Floor area ratio, which is the ratio of built space to land area. So it's an indicator of intensity. Stories, an indicator of building height. Vacancy rates, effective year built. Median household income for the block group. A variable for race ethnicity. Compactness index is based on Reed Ewing and Shima Hamidi's sprawl index announced earlier this year for the Brookings Institution and Ford Foundation. I won't explain it except that go look it up, but it's a very nifty way to measure land use integration, land use mix, and land use connectivity. And we see here that the more integrated, the more mixed, the more connected the land uses are in a block group. I'm sorry, the census tract is the measure here. The higher the value per square foot. Distance from the CBD, the farther away from the CBD you go, the lower the value per square foot. Distance from freeways, also, the farther away you are from the interchange, the lower the value per square foot. And we do a quadratic transformation of that, but let's focus on distance from nearest light rail transit station. What we have here are two variables. The first variable is it shows the direct effect, so that the farther away you are from a transit station, the lower the value per square foot. then we square that to get a curve. So that there's a declining value at an increasing rate, which actually, and I'll show you the result for that momentarily, but what it means is that at a certain distance, the value premium peaks and then falls thereafter. We control for Denver because we have a Denver-Dallas database. Pretty good R-square on the whole, huge F, a lot of observations, and so on. So what we have here, it turns out that for both these metropolitan areas combined, there is a premium for office space out to 2.35 miles from the nearest transit station. That's 3.3 miles in Denver and 1.85 miles in Dallas. Well, that's a long ways. There might be a lot of reasons for that. I think maybe there's a lot of the bus connectivity premium going on. So if you're a worker, you hop the bus, you get to the station, you take a bus from the station to get you to your office, and maybe these are all on corridors, so it's fairly efficient, and the market capitalizes that transit connectivity. But but then I asked the question in my database, okay, where does 50% of the value premium drop? It turns out to be 0.65 miles from the nearest transit station for both these areas combined. The transit premium is cut in half. So this would be sort of my primary distance from the nearest transit station, basically pretty close to the half-mile circle. But the 75% decay, which is where we see still values are pretty solid out to a mile, 1.2 miles from the transit station. So I think that we can, with some confidence, say we need to push the office planning envelope out to maybe 1 mile, basically pretty close to the apartment and actually the residential planning envelope around TODs. Now, we did take a look at retail results, and they were very odd. I won't go into that very much. We get a 3.3 mile distance premium, 1.1 mile, 50% decay. I worry about the data in this case because it turns out CoStar only has data for rent retail, where half of the retail space and maybe more than half the retail space is single occupant, single tenant retail like a Target, a Walmart, and they just don't rent. So I'm not so sure that we could take the retail analysis very far. Industrial, we looked only at flex spaces. We had a very large distance threshold, a very large distance decay. Again, I want to take a look at this in more detail later on, so stay tuned for more results on this. I think these results are maybe a bit farther out than I feel comfortable with, but maybe there's something going on. And I've got some ways to, my team has some ways to check on this. So let's move now to transit and economic development. Here's a big screen sort of arguing that there is a relationship between transit systems and economic development. I won't read it all. We will have this posted for you on the NITC website, so you can actually go to this and read it more carefully. But the bottom line is that we don't have a lot of information in the literature on whether there are economic development benefits from transit, or particularly to commuter rail transit or bus rapid transit. I have one study. The only study out there is mine on BRT. And we need to do a better job on light rail transit, and there's nothing out there that I see yet on streetcar transit, but we will fix that with our ongoing study in the next few months. So we also look at, we also want to compare the transit outcomes with corridor comparisons. It's one thing to say that, well, transit is doing better than metropolitan areas as a whole in terms of attracting economic development, but what about comparable corridors without transit? Do they perform as well or better or worse? And so we have studies that show that do the comparison between transit corridors and control corridors in target metropolitan areas. The chief method of our analysis is shift share. Again, I really won't go into explaining all this in the interest of time. This will be posted on the NITC website. But what we do is we compare commuter rail transit and bus rapid transit to metropolitan areas as a whole. I'll show that. And then we compare light rail transit to comparable corridors in the same metropolitan areas to see how well they perform. And streetcar transit is a little more difficult to work out, but we're going to come up with a way to do that. So this is the Emerald Express in Eugene, Oregon, home of the University of Oregon. And I like to say that those who are football fans, this is one of the University of Oregon football players on a Sunday. But you see the bus rapid transit system it moves from downtown Eugene to downtown Springfield. All points in between. It's actually been expanded since the study was done, or since the study time frame was done. Uh-oh. So apologies, I have, the system is crashing. So Renata, can you pull up, beginning with the slide showing the bus?
Yes, just give me 1 second here, Chris.
Apologies to those tuning in. We did go through Chris's slides before the broadcast, and he was having technical difficulties then, so hopefully we can overcome them.
Do you want to go ahead and retry, Chris?
Okay, I've got mine back up again. Let's do the retry. Can you give me the screen switch?
Yep, you have it.
Well, I don't see it.
Let's see, so, oh, I see you don't see your control panel. Hang on here, 1 second.
Oh, I see a control panel on the upper right.
Mm-hmm. So go ahead and put your PowerPoint to full screen.
Oh, okay. That's not, okay, here we go. I'm back on full screen.
Mm-hmm. I see your screen now, and everyone can see as well. I think we're back to normal now. Thank you for your patience.
Sorry, everyone. Modern technology. So here is the Eugene, Oregon bus rapid transit shift share analysis for quarter mile to up to a quarter mile and then quarter mile to a half a mile. Now what we did here is we compared the between 2004 and 2011 the concentration of jobs by major sector within the quarter mile and also the next quarter mile from BRT stations. And we compared the concentration in 2011, and we did a comparison. Then we used the shift share analysis to see the extent to which certain sectors lost or gained concentration relative to the metropolitan area as a whole. We have a large BRT effect within the first quarter mile. For total job shifting, almost all the jobs that we accounted for in the whole overall model were shifted within the first quarter mile of BRT. That tells me that maybe BRT stations have only a quarter mile job effect, where offices, because they're capitalizing rents out to a mile at the 75% level, maybe offices can extend on light rail transit. So maybe offices on light rail transit are double or maybe triple the distance here. So we have to look at this, but I think that's the insight there. But in terms of some key sectors, healthcare lost concentration, public administration lost concentration. The jobs were distributed throughout the rest of the county. This is anomalous because about a year, 2 years, about a year after this study was done, a big medical center was located right on the extension of the BRT line. So if we were to redo the analysis with new data, this actually might be pushed way up into a concentration side, and this figure might be larger too. But on the whole, we find very strong job shifting outcomes with respect to BRT in the first quarter mile, and some in the next quarter mile beyond. But there are certain sectors where that doesn't apply so much: utilities, construction, manufacturing, warehousing. I think we can all imagine the good reasons why that would be the case. So moving on, let's look at commuter rail transit. You know, there are no studies that we found that look at the extent to which commuter rail transit has an economic development impact. Now, to be sure, there are all kinds of commuter rail alternatives out there. There's the very famous systems that serve New York and Boston and Philadelphia and Chicago. But let's look at the Sun Belt, the new generation of commuter rail systems. We looked at the rail runner that connects Santa Fe to Albuquerque, Tri-Rail, which serves southeastern Florida, Miami-Dade County, West Palm Beach, and so forth. The Front Runner, which goes along the Wasatch Front in the Salt Lake area. The Coaster, which is San Diego, and the Sounder, which is a Seattle area. So we looked at these 5 fairly new. They've been in business for about 10 years or so, 15 years. These fairly new Sun Belt commuter rail systems. And what we find, this is again a kind of a complex table. Sorry about that. But what we find is that within the first quarter mile of the commuter rail stations, we see fairly impressive job shifting over time in certain sectors: utilities, wholesale, transportation, warehousing, management, administration, some education, and arts and entertainment. These are all kind of low rent activities, and they are, so I think the extent to which a low rent activity is sensitive to having workers that can't drive or would rather take some other transit to them, CRT stations may be attractive. Now when you move out the next quarter mile, the situation really is reduced. So really for CRT stations, it is the first quarter mile where we see some pretty, well, I shouldn't say impressive, but pretty good results. Now, what's interesting to me is that I don't know that anybody is really planning for development around these CRT stations, and I think there's an opportunity there to do so to actually enhance economic development. So we should see the next generation of TOD planning to include CRT stations. Now, a big concern in planning is we want to have low-wage jobs be more accessible to transportation systems, especially rail. And so we asked the question: do lower-wage jobs follow when LRT stations are assembled, are built? So to do this, we compared LRT corridors with similar lengths and similar kinds of land uses at a base year along control corridors. And we defined lower wage jobs as the census does under the LEHD database as under, I think it's, I forget the details now, about $600 per month. Upper wage is anything above $600 per month. What we find in the control and the LRT corridors for the oldest stations, the oldest LRT stations, 2004 to 2011, that there was a small reduction in lower wage jobs in control corridors, but a larger reduction in those jobs in the LRT corridors. And we're using location quotients, so these are relative to the metropolitan area as a whole. Relative to the metropolitan area as a whole, LRT corridors lost more jobs in the lower wage sectors, and the control corridors lost less. On the upper wage jobs, control corridors gained some, and there's really no change in the light rail corridors. And these are for the oldest, the 6 oldest systems, and I forget what they are: Portland, San Diego, Salt Lake City, and a couple others. For the newest 5 LRT systems, this would be Minneapolis, St. Paul. I can't remember offhand what the other ones were. Here we see, for the newer ones, substantial reductions in lower wage jobs along the control corridors, but even more loss, higher loss in the LRT corridors. And for the control corridors, a small gain, but a larger gain along the LRT corridors. Putting them all together, all 11 systems that we studied, here we see that really LRT corridors on the whole did not perform as well as control corridors. Now this, and while they did better in terms of attracting the upper wage jobs. what this is telling me is that markets are shifting. Upper income, upper wage, higher value markets are shifting towards LRT corridors gradually. Markets don't change overnight. And so what's happening is the lower wage, the lower value land uses are being pushed out, and the higher wage, higher value jobs are moving in slowly. But the control corridors that have been around a lot longer are basically holding their own, though I suspect over time control corridors will actually gain share in upper wage jobs, and control corridors will probably stay roughly where they are now. So now we look at transit and economic resilience. We wanted to see whether a case can be made that transit stations, transit investments, can allows a metropolitan economy to weather economic shocks better than situations where you don't have transit available. So conceptually, we have job levels at a pre-shock level. Then we have the shock. The theory is that the transit corridor will have a smaller shock than our control corridors would have for the same metropolitan areas. And then post-shock job levels would have a faster return, faster recovery in transit corridors compared to control corridors. Now, we do have results, but they're fairly detailed and complex to present. So I have put up here a review of them. During the Great Recession, transit corridors over the first quarter-mile band outperformed control corridors in half the sectors, and these are the sectors, and compared to the metropolitan areas, and in 3 of them, excluding manufacturing. This is during the Great Recession. During recovery after the Great Recession, transit corridors recovered more rapidly than control corridors, and they were more resilient than metropolitan areas as a whole. So we compared the control corridors, the transit corridors to control corridors, transit corridors to the metropolitan areas as a whole, and we find that during the recession they did better than control corridors and metropolitan areas. During recovery, they also did better than both. But out beyond 1.25 miles, the results were less impressive. They were slightly more robust, but less impressive for corridors as well as the metropolitan area as a whole. So this paper has been accepted as a lecture and presentation for the TRB in January, and also revised resubmit for Transportation Research Board. Now we are undergoing a study on some streetcars, the Seattle streetcar, the Tampa Bay streetcar, and the Portland streetcar, the 3 systems we're looking at for our NITC study. So these are the preliminary results for the streetcar system in downtown Portland, and we actually looked at 1/8 mile corridors. So the streetcar system is here, the black line, and we only looked at this area here. This area we had data for the period 2002 through 2011. This is an extension that happened after our study period. What we find is that within the first 1/8 of a mile, jobs for all of Multnomah County, the central county for Portland, jobs in all of Multnomah County increased by about 7,500. Within the streetcar sector only, within an 1/8 of a mile of the streetcar, they increased by 1,000. Oh, let's see. I've got to rethink this. Okay, within an 1/8 of a mile of a streetcar, we gained 1,000 jobs, and within an 1/8 of a mile of streetcar and light rail transit, we gained 6,000 jobs. Both combined gained 7,500 jobs. That plus that. So for the county as a whole, I misspoke that. For the county as a whole, streetcars accounted for 21% of all of the new jobs in Multnomah County, the central county. But when you go out 1/8 of a mile to 1/4 of a mile, the situation is different. It's reversed, in fact. So it looks to me like our results indicate that there's a very strong attractor to the streetcar and the streetcar plus light rail transit within a very tight walking range of downtown, but that actually falls off dramatically in the next 1/8 mile. And here's the total, which is not very important. So what we're finding now for for transit planning, streetcars might have the tightest area for TOD planning, 1/8 of a mile perhaps. BRT might have the next tightest band, maybe 1/4 of a mile. LRT actually goes out to a mile, maybe a little more, longer than a mile. Commuter Rail Transit, maybe just a mile to maybe just a half a mile. So we're zeroing in on tailoring the TOD planning area based on the system, with the light rail transit systems ending up being maybe the most robust in terms of having the larger capture areas. So stay tuned. We have a lot more things coming out. Here's a short list. We are just starting now job change by transit station distance rather than corridor distance. Over time by economic sector, by wage band, by households and household types, by housing mix, and by housing and transportation affordability. And we're also going to look at some of these effects before, during, and after the Great Recession. And I want to give my hats off to what I call the dream team. We've had a lot of people help with this project over the past 2 years. And this is, I can't go over all the roles all these people played, but this has been the most productive experience I've ever had as an academic and professional in this business. So with that, I think I'm ready for questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Chris. Wow, that was quite a bit of information that you've shared with the audience. So we do have a couple of questions and about 13 minutes to answer all of them. So I'll just take them in the order they were entered in. The first question is from Ryan Westrom, and his question is, going back to the early part of your presentation, for the residential price premiums, were those price premiums seen at a quarter-mile bands additive, so cumulative increases by 1 1.25, or all versus a non-TOD location? So in other words, was there a difference between an apartment at a quarter mile and 1 1/4 miles?
There's a vast difference between apartments at 1/4 mile versus 1 mile. These are not additive. These are values with respect to each individual band distance from the nearest station. So for the nearest band, a quarter mile, the premium is about $8 per square foot for apartments, and only for those apartments in that 1/4 mile band. In the next quarter mile band, it's about $4 per square foot, only for those apartments in that next band, and so on. I hope that clarifies that. I need to clarify that myself in future presentations.
Okay, great. So the next question is, what do you speculate might cause the difference between streetcar, BRT, and light rail effects? Perhaps travel speed?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good observation. I haven't really had a chance to get into the differences for that, but that's a very good observation. The slowest speed there is streetcar, and the next slowest is bus rapid transit, and light rail is the fastest. Also, you tend to have more streetcar stations within the same distance than light rail. You also tend to have more BRT stations in the same distance between them as LRT. So there may be a speed effect. There may be a distance effect. And I think there might be a kind of another effect, because when you get beyond an eighth of a mile in a downtown setting, you might have other alternatives to get around. You can walk, get more places walking, but maybe you can hop a bus, or maybe you can hop some other thing in downtown that you don't have access to, where it might be closer than the streetcar. Bus rapid transit, probably not many other options, but it is the next slowest, although the bus rapid transit stations tend to be closer together. So we need to take a look at this, and I appreciate that insight, and I think that would allow us to sort of explain why the differences are the way they are.
Okay, great. This question is from Vivian Satterfield. How did you attempt to control for land use zoning changes that were part of the Portland streetcar project in calculating job growth?
That's a capital question. our study period is restrained by the data available. The data are the census data from 2002, which really came after the streetcar was fully underway, or nearly so, and 2011. So all we could do was measure differences after the land was redeveloped, or was, I should say, was redeveloping in 2002, and after it was built out basically by 2011. We really don't have a way to go back to the 1990s to do this pre-post analysis. I think that would be a wonderful doctoral dissertation case study. In fact, I have a doctoral dissertation on my desk, or in my files, from somebody who did sort of analyze the political, social, economic debate surrounding all of the land use changes leading to the new master plan for the Rose Quarter. Not the Rose Quarter. The you bail me out here. The Rose Quarter's across the river.
Right.
This is the northwest part of downtown redevelopment area.
Oh, so the Pearl District?
The Pearl, yeah, the Pearl. Sorry about that. So this study does not really address that.
All right. So another question. So Chris, are there differences in outcomes with respect to the different modes? I know you talked a lot about the light rail, but would they be different for streetcar, BRT, et cetera? And again, you presented a lot of information.
Well, we need to look at that. We know that within the first eighth mile, or let's say the first quarter mile, BRT does pretty well. But does it do better within the first quarter mile than LRT? We don't know. And I would like to find a way with our databases to answer that question. I think we can, because some of these metropolitan areas, Las Vegas, Phoenix, and so forth, they have BRT systems and light rail systems along fairly comparable corridors. So we have a new study coming up, also sponsored by NITC, on looking at the development outcomes to bus rapid transit for about 15 or 18 stations or systems around the country. And once we have those data collected, we have data on 17 or so light rail systems, and some metropolitan areas have both. So I'm hoping that with our next study with NITC, we'll be able to answer the question, which performs better given the similar information, given similar circumstances, bus rapid transit or light rail transit. My sense is that, well, actually, I don't have a sense. I was going to say one or the other, but no, the jury is out. It's going to be interesting, and we'll certainly share that information with you when we have that done next June.
Okay. So when we took the poll earlier at the beginning of this webinar, I noticed that there were quite a few planners and engineers and professionals tuning into this webinar. What are some key takeaways from your research that they can use in their work?
With respect to light rail transit, we were surprised by how much the market responded to distance to the nearest light rail station, out to a mile, for many of the residential land uses. Maybe not all of them, but many of them. So I think we need to rethink the distance over which we plan for residential for light rail transit. We haven't done the analysis for bus rapid transit or streetcar or commuter rail transit because the data just are not there so far. We have to get individual county data, assessor data, and sales data. Those are difficult to come by, at least with limited budgets. But that would be a study we would need to do later on. So I'm talking only then with respect to light rail transit. Also with respect to LRT, it looks to us like the market gives a premium for office development also out to up to a mile away. So now I think that the data also show that you have, the closer you are, the higher the capitalization of benefits, and so clearly you have a declining activity, a declining value band from, or value distance from light rail stations. But you can push your light rail planning areas out to a mile. And when you do that, you might be able to find situations where light rail stations are close enough between each other that you kind of get 2-mile planning areas between them. And that would I think that would revolutionize the way in which we plan light rail corridors. In that sense, we would think of light rail corridor planning when the light rail stations are even 2 miles apart, and oftentimes they're much closer than that. For BRT, we have more study coming out on that. My sense is that, well, we don't know how the residential market responds to BRT. We can only measure that by looking at the extent to which residential development moves closer to BRT stations relative to the county or metropolitan area as a whole. That will be part of our next study that NITC is sponsoring. But I will say for non-residential land uses, it looks to us like the market responsiveness to BRT is probably that first quarter mile. And so there the half-mile circle may not be as appropriate, though we certainly do see some job formation out to a half-mile from BRT. But maybe we split the difference, and maybe we say the job sectors respond to within 3/8 of a mile of BRTs. But it may very well be that residential still responds out to a mile. We don't know that yet, but I'm hoping we will find out in our next round. For commuter rail, that's a really interesting area that really is grossly understudied, and we really were surprised with the lack of literature on that. Even in areas where you have historically these massive lines, commuter corridor lines in the Northeast and Chicago, they're just really understudied. I think one reason is that they are associated with the very intensive train stations and industrial land uses around those stations, especially in the Sunbelt cities that we studied. The typical CRT station is a joint venture basically with freight rail, which is not very attractive to kind of work or live near. But then nonetheless, I think there's interesting opportunities to look at, study more carefully economic development and residential activities around CRTs. So there's a lot to be done. There's a lot of questions. We're asking more questions than we're answering, but I guess that's the nature of this business.
Great. So we don't have any more questions, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to share with you some of the products that have resulted from Chris's research. And if hopefully you can see on my screen right now is the NITC website with his research project, which is based on the TODs Make a Difference. And as you can see, you can dive deeper into each of the elements that he talked about today. So Chris, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day to share with us the results of your research study. For those tuning in, please feel free to visit our website for more professional development opportunities. We have 2 upcoming free training sessions, one in December. Dr. Mark Schlossberg will be presenting Rethinking Streets, an evidence-based guide to 25 complete street transformation, which will be quite interesting. And then on January 29th, we have Sarisha Kothuri presenting her research results on incorporating pedestrian considerations into signal timing design. So with that, please be on the lookout for an email with a short evaluation survey, and thank you so much for tuning in.